everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GBNews.
Amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there and happy Friday to you. It is 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co. Now there are fears that many people will indeed be taking to the streets of Britain this weekend. All well and good if it's peaceful, but what if it's not? We saw yesterday the Prime Minister talking about this massive clampdown and how he plans to increase the use of things like intelligence sharing and facial recognition. Is this all fair, or is it a little bit of state overreach? Your thoughts? Also, should serial killers essentially be allowed to marry in prison? I laugh because it is so ridiculous, but this is actually a debate that needs to be happening today at Levi Belfield. Remember him? Ugh, he's not allowed to do so. Should he be or not? Also, Huw Edwards, should he have to give his £200,000 paycheck back? And have you been following this very bizarre setup when it comes to the boxing in the Olympics? Do you think the ruling is fair? Many people saying you've essentially got a situation where you've got a man and a woman in a boxing ring. Your thoughts? All of that and more, but first, the 6 o'clock news.
Michelle, thank you very much and good evening to you. It's just after 6 o'clock. The top story tonight. The Prime Minister has returned to Southport today, visiting the town for the second time this week after Monday's knife attack that killed 3 young girls there. Sir Keir Starmer's met with members of the local community, police officers and health services. He's also paid a visit to Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool, where many of the victims of Monday's attack were being treated. The Prime Minister praised the hospital staff for their professionalism in treating the injured. And Southport has since seen violent unrest due to false claims about the attacker's identity that was spread on social media, with concerns now of further violence in the Liverpool City region over the weekend. Sir Keir Starmer's condemned any hatred on the streets and is calling for a national response to disorder. Robert Jenrick this afternoon claimed that the Conservatives lost the general election in July because of a broken promise on immigration. The former immigration minister was speaking at the launch of his campaign to become leader of the Tories and to succeed Rishi Sunak. Mr Jenrick also claimed the British political system has appeared, he said, either unwilling or unable to secure the UK's borders.
Broke our promise to the British public to deliver controlled and reduced migration and the secure border that the public rightly demand. We allowed the cycle of broken promises to continue. And as a minister, when I concluded that I couldn't secure any more changes to our legal migration system, I resigned from Cabinet last year.
A mural of the former newsreader Huw Edwards in his home village in Carmarthenshire has been removed. The artwork's now been painted over, while institutions including Bangor and Cardiff University are reviewing their ties with the ex-presenter after he admitted to accessing indecent images of children. The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy's calling on the BBC to reclaim the £200,000 in salary that Mr Edwards received between his arrest in November and his resignation in April this year. We've heard tonight that 96 migrants are suing the UK government, claiming they were badly treated at the Manston Processing Centre in Kent. Their lawyers claim the group were unlawfully detained between September and November 2022, with allegations also including a lack of access to hygiene products, forced removal of hijabs and reportedly inadequate conditions for children and pregnant women. The High Court's granted the 96 asylum seekers anonymity, claiming they could be at risk if identified. The Home Office hasn't yet filed their defence. 3 US citizens who were freed in the biggest prisoner swap between Russia and the West in decades are now back on American soil. Among them are US reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was arrested last March. He was charged with gathering secret information on CIA orders, which he denies. Vladimir Kara-Murza, a British-Russian citizen, was also released in exchange for 8 Russian prisoners. Among those let out in return was an assassin serving life in Germany. And in sport, Great Britain are having a successful day at the Paris Games with further medal hopes in store tonight. Golds in rowing, equestrian and trampolining have taken Team GB up to 3rd now in the medal table. And tonight, BMX rider Bethany Shriever and swimmers Ben Proud, Duncan Scott and Tom Dean are all among the British hopefuls. And finally, some troubling news if you are a fan of crumpets. Some batches have been removed from supermarket shelves today because they may contain pieces of metal. The Food Standards Agency says certain batches of Morrison's crumpets with a best before of either the 6th or the 7th of August could be, they say, unsafe to eat. And that warning also applies to the Hovis brand with the same dates. So do be careful if you're picking up any of those packets. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Plenty more still to come throughout the evening. Up next, though, is Michelle.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Goodness me, looking at those headlines there, it seems that even crumpets are not safe now. What is this well coming to? At least crumpets haven't yet been called far right. So there is still a little bit of hope. I'm Michelle Dewberry. I'm with you until 7 o'clock tonight. The Conservative Life Peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, alongside me, and the trade unionist and author Paul Embry is too. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
Something very disturbing that you were chuntering to me whilst we were listening to that crumpet story. You were saying that no one should be eating crumpets in August anyway. What are you talking about?
Crumpets aren't for August. Crumpets are winter food. Nobody eats crumpets in August.
Well, evidently they do.
Well, they shouldn't.
Peers of the realm like you probably don't eat crumpets ever at all. It's a proper working class delicacy.
They are not. Crumpets are a great thing to eat on the end of a fork, toasted in front of an open, roaring fire.
God, I'll do
in the middle of the winter, and then drenched in butter. They are very bad for my waistline, which is why I don't eat them a lot, but I love them.
Didn't have you down as a crumpet man, Daniel. I've got to be honest.
How the other half live? Roasting their crumpets in an open fireplace. We've never done anything of the sort of you. One of the raging arguments I have in my household all the time, well, not all the time, actually, frequently, is whether or not those things are crumpets or pikelets. I grew up calling them pikelets. I always remain adamant that that's what they are.
No, pikelets are different.
This is why I have an argument in my house.
I knew about pikelets
too. Are small and thin and all the rest.
Exactly.
That's what everyone tells, but you won't convince me.
They don't have all the holes in them.
Is this a northern thing?
I don't know. If you're in the north, tell me, do you agree with me? Do you call a crumpet a pikelet, or am I just losing my marbles? Anyway, look, there's lots I want to talk to you about tonight, not just crumpets. Oh, you know the drill, don't you? How you can get in touch with me tonight. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go to the website, gbnews.com/yoursay, and talk to me and each other there. I haven't said hello to you yet on there, but I will, bear with me. Or you can tweet or X me at GBnews. But wherever you're watching or listening, you're very, very very welcome tonight. Now, should we kick off then with our top story? We all know what's been going on up and down the country when it comes to people taking to the streets to share their anger, their frustration with that horrendous murder of those 3 little girls and the assault and attempted murder on many of the others. Absolutely appalling. Feelings still running very, very high across the country. Well, we saw our Prime Minister, didn't we? Keir Starmer yesterday addressed the nation, rightly so, condemning the violence against people, property and places of worship, and then announcing a crackdown. National crime units, the expansion of facial recognition systems, joined up working when it comes to the police, shared intelligence and so on and so forth. Obviously, I've got to point out again that he completely failed to even look at a single reason why anybody might even be taking to the streets in the first place. So how effective his speech was is a little bit questionable, if you ask me. Anyway, people are saying that lots of people are planning to take to the streets this weekend in protest and, of course, counter-protest. What do you think then to this expansion of things like facial recognition, etc.?
Well, first of all, there's no excuse whatsoever for violence against the police, against property or against innocent people. And if the Prime Minister says that should be cracked down on, then he's right. The police should be there to protect us from that. And we should be supporting him in doing that. I do think, however, that he's fallen back very easily into a sort of left-wing narrative, which is that this is all about the far right, and which is never defined, and the far right is bad. He's never actually said these things should also apply to people who are demonstrating on behalf of other causes, where the police are very, very gingerly in the way in which they deal with them, as far as I can see. So crack down by all means, but it needs to be even-handed. That's the first thing.
And do you trust it will be?
No, I don't trust it will be, because, as I say, he falls back very comfortably into this narrative that we've got this major far-right problem in this country, where many of us think we have a problem across the spectrum with violence, or at both ends of the spectrum, and that the police aren't dealing with it in an even-handed sort of way. We saw this over the Gaza demonstrations and things like that, and the violence, the sporadic violence, that wasn't all violent, of course, majority of it wasn't, but the sporadic violence and threat and aggression that arose in the context of those demonstrations, where the police behaved in a very different way. So I think, he needs to be more even-handed about it. I think there's also this question of trying to understand what is going on. I don't understand what's going on. There are 2 narratives, aren't there? One is that there are people out there, ordinary people, who are outraged at this event and feel that there is a lot of crime going on, much of it in their minds associated with immigrants, which needs to be stopped. The other is that it's being organised by a small group of people who haven't been named, but who are organising this, who have got, organised buses and coaches and get people on trains and things like that. And that it isn't a spontaneous population at all. It's an organised, thuggish population. I don't know which of those
by the way,
is true.
I am playing some clips from a protest that was at Downing Street. Well, I mean, have you seen how these police are behaving? That fella that you've just witnessed on your screen, he was stood there. He was punched in the face by what I'm seeing. Punched in the face. There we go again. Look at this. He's just standing there. He ain't what we're describing, someone that's lobbing bricks. He's getting battered in the face. And now he's yanked onto the floor. Did you see that knee, everybody? Did you see that police officer's knee? Was there any need for that level of police, what I would call, it's almost borderline brutality? Look at that. Do you ever see anyone getting treated like that at a Palestine march? Nope. Do you ever see anyone that thinks that they can gather around police stations dictating law and order, getting treated like that? Nope. Paul Embry, your thoughts?
Look, I don't think protesters should have gone to Southport on that evening to a town in grief, and certainly shouldn't have.
A lot of them was from there.
Well, some of them were, but some of them weren't, and they certainly shouldn't have carried out the violence that some of them did. That's indefensible and needs to be condemned in the strongest terms. But it is totally lazy just to dismiss people the whole time as being far right. It is now the go-to label to attack any kind of working class rebellion, frankly. Not that defends some of the actions that we've seen. I think you do need to call people out and condemn them where they inflict violence on people's property and on other innocent human beings. But it isn't good enough to dismiss people as just saying you're from the far right. BBC Verify published an article today, no less. And even they said, and I tweeted it earlier, even they said in that article that not everyone... There was no obvious far-right organisation involved, and not everyone who went to Southport was involved in fringe politics or could be dismissed as somebody on the far right. A lot of them went there because they were worried about the phenomenon of violent crime. And I just feel that if you constantly just dismiss people as being on the far right, then what you end up doing is debasing the term. So people who really are on the far right suddenly then merge into the mainstream. And when they're called out, they say, well, why are you attacking me for being far right? Look, they call people who supported Brexit far right.
That's what I said. I'm surprised they're not declaring those crumpets as being far right.
They call people who oppose open borders far right. They say people who say a man can't become a woman, they say those people are far right. So actually the term in the end becomes meaningless. We don't have, in my view, a seriously organised far right in this country. There are some people who genuinely are Nazis, people who genuinely are fascists, but what I think we're seeing is not the protests of people with far-right ideology or of a far-right organisation, but people who, although they're expressing it in a very sort of inchoate and in some cases violent way, are just at the moment feeling very angry about the direction of the country. And there's all sorts of problems that are stacking up for this country, and we need to be honest about it. People are suffering from grinding economic insecurity. People see that, you know, low-level crime in some cases has effectively been legalised when you look at bike theft and phone theft and fare evasion and shoplifting and stuff like that. People see an immigration system that is absolutely broken, and they just sense that nobody at the top has got any idea how to fix these things. And I tweeted on the way here.
But look what I'm showing you here, because there is no excuse for this. I think this one is in Hartlepool.
Yeah, this is Hartlepool, and this is...
There's no excuse. And one of the things that distressed me, actually, was that I heard an 11-year-old boy had been, I don't know if he was arrested or questioned or something, for setting fire to a police vehicle in Hartlepool. 11 years
and I saw
old. That really broke my heart.
I saw some footage of Hartlepool where it looked like someone of an ethnic minority background was attacked in the street, just walking along the street.
Yeah, that was
and
awful.
it's appalling, and I hope the people responsible for that go to jail for a very long time. That cannot be defended. It's absolutely
because I would say that is racist.
Despicable.
If you see a guy walking down the street and you're walloping him for no reason, presumably other than his ground,
absolutely, it's racist. If you attack someone because of the colour of their skin, absolutely, it's racist behaviour, and it needs to be called out, and the people need to be punished for it. But let's also be clear that that's a minority of people, and there's a broad body of people in this country who are quite angry about the state of the country and feel that there's a chasm between the priorities of the governing elite and the governed, if you like. And I think some of that is starting to play out in some of these protests as well. And I was going to say, this is not like a 1997 moment. I detect there is no particular goodwill for Keir Starmer and this Labour government, and I say that as a Labour Party member of 30 years. Even though they were elected just a few weeks ago on a massive landslide, there's no particular feeling of goodwill. There's a real simmering tension, I think, in this country. This is not like 1997 at all, when after the Labour government was elected, there was that sort of feeling of euphoria, there was that upbeat feeling, call Britannia and that kind of thing. I think this is something very, very different, and it can play out in various ways, but there's a danger that it's going to play out in a really negative way on our streets.
Well, I've realised now we've got this terminology now about being a government of service. Did you notice that? Kept getting repeated yesterday, government of service, government of service, government of service. Obviously, he will know that only about 20% of the electorate obviously voted for that government. And many people will say, I hear you guys, I listen to you every day, people get in touch, and they'll say, we're not far right, Michelle, we've just been right so far. And I think that many people, I think that sums up an awful lot of people.
The question for Keir Starmer is, you know, let's say you're a totally non-violent person, and you actually think there's too much immigration, you think there's a problem with the police not dealing with low-level crime, and you're just unhappy about the way things are going. Where do you go peacefully to complain about this without being called far right? There's nowhere to go. There's nobody listening to you.
The ballot box.
Hang on, I
There's the
listen
ballot
to
box.
viewers. I
There's the
listen to
ballot
viewers
box.
every week.
But where do you go amongst...
I was about to agree with you. I was going to say the ballot box is supposed to be a pressure relief valve. It's where people should be able to go and say, I'm not happy with this aspect of the way the country is being governed. I want to change it, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put my cross in this box. They did it with Brexit. They did it when the Tories promised year after year that they would get immigration down. Now, if 10, 15 years later, they've been told for all of that time, we are going to sort out the borders, we are going to get immigration down, and every year they see it go up and up and up, people then say, well, what is the point of the ballot box? What is the point of democracy? Because nobody is listening to us, and that's when you get the scenes that we're seeing on our streets at the moment.
I saw a really strange thing in Southport, actually, when it was all unfolding, and I don't know if anyone else noticed this. I was watching it very carefully, and there was a group of people that had gone to the streets in anger, frustration, so on and so forth. They were all there. They didn't have their faces covered. There was no, they were there. And then there was this group, and I don't know if anyone noticed this, within this kind of collective, and they were almost dressed identically. It was almost like they had some kind of odd, peculiar uniform on, black from top to bottom, with their hoodies, like, pulled up, black hoodies pulled up, right up, black, whatever it was, scarf, mask, or whatever, right up to their eyes, black jackets, black trousers, as I said, black from top to bottom, and they were agitators.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that seemed to be right at the front, sparking all the trouble. Now, these guys have obviously been classed as far right. Who are they?
Yeah, but I'd like to know that as well.
Who is it? And how do we know, how does anyone know, actually, it's not about me, how does anybody know that there's actually not agitators that are not
Agent
from the right,
provocateurs.
that are not from the right of politics, that are actually going along to these kind of gatherings, protests, whatever you want to call them?
It's probably not as fanciful as you might think, because in the Great Miners' Strike in the 1980s, there were suggestions, and I think some evidence, actually, that happened in terms of some of the demonstrations and the protests that were taking place with the miners, that there were agent provocateurs who were put in there to make things look much worse than they actually were. So I genuinely don't know the answer.
That's a conspiracy theory a bit too far for me.
Well,
it is a good
look at the role
question.
of the role of the state and the police in the miners' strike, Daniel. You really think that that's a conspiracy theory too far?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Different
I think
opinions.
we were facing a revolution in the miners' strike, and the police were entitled to take the actions.
Margaret Thatcher closed down an entire industry and threw 250,000 men on the dole, and they responded by going on strike. That's not a revolution.
That's absolutely not what happened, and you know that.
That is exactly what happened.
Half of them didn't even want to strike. They were cajoled into a strike and bullied into a strike by Arthur Scargill, changing the rules, breaking the rules.
Scargill should have held a national ballot. I'll go with you on that. But the idea that
calling a strike, not over pay, but on the absurd demand that no mine should ever close until it was physically exhausted. That was the demand that the NUM made. That's the guarantee they wanted. That's what they went on strike for.
They didn't go on strike for that demand.
Yes,
Thatcher decided to close a number of mines. The first mine that she closed was Cortonwood Colliery in South Yorkshire, and when that one was closed, that's when people voted with their feet and went out on strike.
There were always mines being closed in this country. Mines have always been closed.
It was a political attack on the National Union of Mine Workers.
Absolutely not.
The idea that it was a revolution is absurd.
They wanted to bring the government down and the end of democracy, just as they'd done 10 years earlier.
Absolute nonsense.
I don't know what the mining strike's got to do with the goings-on in Britain today. Very different
And we were
opinions
saved
here.
from that revolution.
What do you think to it at
It caused a huge amount of damage in the process.
Excuse me. After the break, we shall continue the conversation about the streets of Britain because, of course, Starmer expanded in his statement yesterday on things like the crackdown, the rolling out of surveillance, facial recognition and so on and so forth. Do you support that move or do you think it's an infringement of privacy? Your thoughts?
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Football and gambling can go hand in hand and cause long-term problems. New figures show that young adults aged between 16 and 24 who have bet over the last year are more likely to report mental health issues compared to those in older age groups.
And joining us now to discuss this is Matt Burgess, who is a former gambling addict and now helps those to deal with their own gambling issues.
Yeah, I think gambling is one of those things that is so accessible now. You know, everyone's got a kind of mobile phone in their pocket, walk around with a kind of 24-hour casino, if you like. So I think it's really important that people realise that we have to sort of recognise that that is a month of quite condensed gambling, and we don't want people to sort of carry that on into their everyday life, because that's when it can become really risky and you know, it can become addictive.
I had no idea, though, that it was linked to first-time gambling. For the first time, people might be able to pick up and have a go. And then it doesn't end there. It goes on, because by then you've got the bug. Is that how it works?
You've got to remember, for things like the Euros, the World Cup, so you get a lot more people watching football and therefore potentially betting on football.
May I ask you about how severe your own gambling addiction got?
Well, look, I think there was a couple of touch points for me where I realised that things were getting out of hand. There were some times at university where, you know, I kind of thought, you know, I'm definitely doing this a bit too much, but, you know, kind of thought maybe it would move on once I left, but it didn't. It did follow me. And then, you know, I got to points where I was at my worst gambling 16, 17 hours a day. I was spending huge amounts of money. It can spiral out of control very, very quickly, and that was the important thing that we want to highlight is, you know, what can start as fun can become very, very dangerous in a sense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Daniel Moylan, Paul Embry remain alongside me. And I can tell you now, all they did during that break is continue rowing about the miners' strike.
Daniel ended up agreeing with every word I said.
It's really got you guys going at home as well. I don't know how I got the miners' strike, but anyway, Mel says before Thatcher came to power, Labour closed more mines than Thatcher did. He might want to research and learn his facts. Ooh,
Labour did close some mines in the 70s, that's true.
Yeah, again, Paul says, Michelle, please can you point out to Paul that Thatcher didn't decimate the coal industry. More pits were closed under Labour than under Thatcher. There you go. Look, so we started the programme talking about the fact that people perhaps will be taking to the streets again this weekend. If they do, I really do hope that, of course, it is peaceful, and I would urge for that. But Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, he's starting to clamp down now when it comes to anyone that are thugs, he would regard them as. We heard about an expansion of facial recognition systems and so on and so forth. Do you support those measures?
I'm very worried about the expansion of facial recognition generally by the police. I do support what they, you know, as I said, if the Prime Minister wants to crack down on violent disorder, then I would support him in doing that. I think it needs to be even-handed, and I think people need to see that it's even-handed. But I am a little bit concerned about facial recognition. But I think the other things the police are doing, deploying extra officers, bringing them from, you know, putting officers on trains, for example, I think those are sensible things to do at times like this. We don't want people who are setting out deliberately to break the law to have life made easy for them in getting there.
But wasn't he saying something along the lines of, if you've got a criminal conviction, they would look to stop you doing things like travelling on the train?
Yeah, well, the other thing is they have this power at the moment that relates particularly to football hooligans to prevent them from travelling in the direction of matches on certain days. And I think what he was saying, if I understand it, was he'd be extending that power so that you could be banned from going to certain places if you had a conviction of some sort. I don't know what sort, maybe, you know, you've been previously convicted for doing it. I think that's also going, it's all going a bit far, but what worries me mostly is that it's being used as a tool to build up this narrative about there's a big, right-wing threat which isn't actually being mirrored even-handedly in relation to violence coming from elsewhere. I mean, our grannies who are obsessed with the world coming to an end tomorrow going to be given orders that stop them going to the National Gallery to damage pictures. You know, is that going to happen? Because I'd like, if you're going to do it to the one, why not to the other?
Paul Embry?
Facial technology, I would normally say it's very sinister and authoritarian and smacks of China. But I'm kind of at the point where I think we have to perhaps give it a fair wind and say we need to try it, because there are some areas of our country which I think are seriously lawless and where there's an awful lot of disorder and high levels of crime, and that can blight communities. It can blight the lives of ordinary people. Usually working class communities are the ones that suffer most from high levels of crime. And if this is a way, a bit like CCTV, if this is a way of bringing people to justice and identifying wrongdoers, then I think we should possibly consider it. I would like to see it...
I think... Can I just
finish the point? I would like to see it restricted. I do not want facial technology if I'm walking on the Devon coast or in the Highlands of Scotland. I don't think it's necessary there. I don't think the government, a state, should be able to track your every move. But in areas of high crime, I think there's an argument for it. I didn't think I would ever make that case. But
in areas of high crime, you've almost certainly already got CCTV, because we are the most CCTV country in the world.
Better.
Okay. So if you're talking about crime in the ordinary sense, which usually doesn't involve mobs, you're talking about crime in the ordinary sense. You can usually pick up pictures, as we know, of the people who are going in and steaming through shops and shoplifting them, you know, stealing, you know, the contents of the shop and so on in gangs, which goes on now, that sort of thing. You can usually get some sort of pictures of those. Facial technology that they're talking about is an ability to pick people out in a crowd. It's particularly intended to be used in sort of not crime situations, but protest-type, mob-type situations.
Steve,
that's what worries me
my
more
viewer
about.
Steve makes a very good point. Says, Michelle, quick question. What use is facial recognition technology when these people intent on crime just going to cover the face anyway?
Yeah.
What's the answer to that?
Well, I think there needs to be an argument to say that people shouldn't mask up in public places.
Well, that's the second part of his thing. He says you should be making it illegal for any face coverings.
I think you'd need to be very careful, because if you're going out on a winter's morning and it's -10, I think you're perfectly entitled to wrap a scarf around your face and to pull your hood down, and clearly that shouldn't be a crime. I think maybe if you are in a certain place, a certain high crime place, then there's no practical reason for you to have your face covered. On a protest, for example. I've been on lots of protests. I wouldn't dream of covering my face. I'm proud of the protests that I've been on, because
what about motorcycle helmets?
I think I'm standing for the right thing and arguing for the right thing. And I would say to people, if you're going to protest, and if you've got nothing to hide, assuming you're not going to commit violence, then actually show your face and be proud about being on the protest. Motorcycle helmets, well, again, if you're going into a bank, for example, Daniel, I think it's reasonable to say to someone, you take the helmet off before you enter the building. I think each case will turn on its own facts, but nonetheless, there's an argument to say that in certain situations in this country, people shouldn't be allowed to mask up.
I found it quite interesting. There's a lady called Silky Carlo, and she runs Big Brother Watch, and she was responding to Keir Starmer's address yesterday. She said she was very angry about it, about his pledge to roll out facial recognition. She says that this is basically mass surveillance that threatens rather than protects democracy. The AI surveillance turns members of the public into walking ID cards, she says. She reckons it's dangerously inaccurate, has no explicit legal basis in the UK, and she says 74% of police facial recognition matches to date have been misidentifications. Got to say, I didn't know that at all. She says to promise the country ineffective AI surveillance in these circumstances was frankly tone deaf, and will give the public no confidence that this government has basically the competence or conviction to get tough on the causes of crime.
It's always a trade-off, isn't it? I've got a cousin who lives in China, and he speaks very highly of the measures that they have there to prevent people from committing crime. They've got facial technology and all sorts of stuff, which
from demonstrating
instinctively. Well, this is the point.
Modelling ourselves on
this is the
China.
Point. This is the point that I'm making. Instinctively, I would find that kind of stuff chilling, but there may be people out there who, unlike us, live in communities where they are constantly blighted by crime, and, you know, they've had their car stolen and they've had their property attacked and they've had their wallet nicked and all the sorts of things, the low-level crime that goes on. And they think, actually, do you know what? I'm not going to object to having a post erected at the corner of my street with facial recognition technology, because if it stops those little blighters from wreaking havoc in this community, I'm prepared to do it. So it's a trade-off. What are we prepared to give in order to have a lower level of crime in this country?
But then many people will be concerned, Daniel. It's about this constant expansion of power. There does seem to be like a lot of chaos being manufactured in society at the moment. We saw that situation after Southport. This account was set up on Twitter and was starting to say this person is an asylum seeker. He came off the boat very recently. That spread absolutely chaos, and it wasn't actually true. So many people will be concerned. There's some kind of agitators somewhere that are deliberately trying to provoke chaos in order to expand police state, expand surveillance state, move into social credit systems, central bank digital currencies. Do you indulge any of those theories or not?
Well, I have no difficulty in believing that there are people out there who want to cause chaos. I think they're more likely to be based in Russia than they are to be based in Whitehall, trying to promote that particular...
And you said I was peddling conspiracy theories.
No, I think it's well known. I mean, it's not secret, I think, that Russia is, particularly Russia, but Belarus and other places like that.
Do you think Russia was involved in some of these protests? Because I've read from commentators,
but I think
people like Paul Mason, for example, are on social media saying this is being organised by Russia. These far-right protests in Southport and elsewhere, Russia's behind it. I mean, do you buy into that? That seems to me really far-fetched.
I don't even know that there are far-right protests in any organised sense. That remains, to my mind. It's claimed that that's the case, but nobody can point to who the organisers are.
Peter says the World Economic Forum. They want you to have nothing and be happy.
Yeah, well, that's probably right. They want you to have nothing and be happy, but then, you know, who cares? But I do think it's...
He would probably say you should care.
Nobody seriously denies that Russia and other actors are seek to promote chaos through spreading false news on the internet. And if they were putting that stuff out there, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
I've got to say, I do think that everyone with a platform has an obligation to be cautious about what they share, because in moments of like high immersion, you get bombarded with stuff, and I've seen it so many times. Like, for example, the Manchester airport situation, where those two fellas were accused of breaking the nose of that policewoman. There was this image going around of this policewoman, white blonde hair with a big gash, and it was circling everywhere. Look at what these guys have done to this woman. That image was from 2016. I also remember on the Southport situation, Andrew Tate, he shared an image and said, like, this is the fella that's done this in Southport. That image was from years before, and I think it was from an instance in Germany. If you're bored tonight, everybody, look up something called a reverse image search, and if in doubt, just do a little bit of checks, because I do think it's incumbent on us all not to inflame situations, and certainly not to be involved in spreading misinformation wherever we can, because actually it can be quite dangerous.
Lots of people repeated the lie in terms of Southport that the suspect was a migrant who had come from Syria.
That's what
was a Muslim on the MI6 watch. It wouldn't even be MI6 for a start. It'd be MI5 watch list. And people who should have known better, including one or two prominent people, forwarded that around. And it's absolutely wrong, because that can put innocent Muslims in danger, because people may think, actually, this is what these people are responsible for, and we're going to go for them. And it turned out to be completely false.
There was another rumour, actually, in Southport, that people were saying that the reason that a mosque was targeted, and many people were saying that they felt a Muslim person had been arrested with a knife. Well, anyway, you all need to look into that, because the name of that person has been released, and it's not what people actually said it was. I can tell you that for free. Anyway, look, we've all got a responsibility, haven't we, to make sure that we're as truthful and as honest as we can be. And social media is nanosecond decisions, isn't it? Tell me your thoughts. Do you think Keir Starmer should be trying to do more with social media companies? He was talking tough, or not? Your thoughts on all of that. After the break, I want to switch the tone a little bit. Prisoners, murderers, some of the worst ones in society, serving whole life sentences. Do you think they should... I mean, it's almost laughable, because I do think it's absurd. Do you think they should ever be able to get married in prison? Your thoughts?
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather from the Met Office. It is going to be relatively warm, not as hot as it has been, but warm and sunny at times through much of this weekend, though there will be some rain pushing through. Initially, we have a front making its way southeastwards through this evening and overnight. That's already brought quite a bit of rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it's now clearing these areas, and so here it is going to turn mostly dry overnight with some clear skies. For England and Wales, though, turning increasingly cloudy, and there will be some outbreaks of rain around. Where we have the cloud, temperatures aren't going to drop much. Another warm night to come, but quite a bit fresher across Scotland and Northern Ireland, dropping into single figures, particularly in more rural spots. But first thing tomorrow, across many parts of England and Wales, it is going to be a bit grey initially. There will be some outbreaks of rain around, and worth bearing in mind, some of the rain could be a little bit heavy at times. A bit brighter first thing across North Wales and much of northern England, though some cloud here and there. A brighter start for Scotland and Northern Ireland, just a couple of showers starting to feed their way in from the west as we go through the morning. Eastern Scotland getting off to a lovely fine start to the day with plenty of sunshine here. Those showers, though, across western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland will become more widespread here as we go through the afternoon, and some heavy ones are quite likely. Meanwhile, across the southern southeastern parts of England, here we will have some bursts of rain through the day, and these could be heavy at times before they clear away later. Elsewhere, a good deal of dry, bright and sunny weather, and with temperatures, albeit not as high as they have been, getting into the mid-20s, it will feel warm in any sunshine. Sunday should get off to a fairly fine start, albeit a fresher start than of late for many of us, before some wetter weather starts to push its way in from the northwest, and this is likely to bring some heavy rain as we go into the beginning of next week, so do watch out for some high rainfall totals, particularly across northern and western parts. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays in Cheshire on the M6 southbound. A lane is closed from junction 17 to 16 near Crewe, where a car's broken down in the left lane. And the M5 in Worcestershire is down to a single lane northbound, about a mile north of the M50 at the scene of an accident. In Cambridgeshire, only one lane's open on that 3-lane stretch of the A1M heading north between Alconbury and Salttree. And on the Hertfordshire stretch of the M25, well, the two inside lanes of 4 are closed clockwise at the A10 junction 25. A lorry's broken down. The queues start before the A1M, not being helped by the roadworks on that stretch, of course. In South London at West Norwood, the A215 remains shut on Knights Hill by an accident, and really slow down the M5 from the M4 into Somerset towards Clevedon due to holiday traffic. And trains are suspended in North Yorkshire at Saltburn. It's down to a points failure, Northern tell us. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Daniel Moylan and Paul Embry remain alongside me. Now, if you're in prison serving a whole life sentence, and to be clear, what I mean by that is you are one of the worst wrong-uns in society, you're not coming out, should you be able to get married behind bars? Do you remember the serial killer Levi Belfield? Well, he is among those people now that have been told, no, you cannot get married because of a new law. I've got to start by saying, for the life of me, I can't even get my head around what kind of individual would even want to marry the kind of person that is in prison on a whole life tariff, but I'll park that for a moment. Do you think anyone should be able to marry these people?
Yeah, I do. This was rushed through Parliament, in my view, because of the dissolution of Parliament, the general election, and it was pushed through, and I think, first, for two reasons. First of all, people have a natural right to get married. It's part of human nature. And I don't think it doesn't come from the state. The right to get married isn't given to you by the state. It's inherent in human nature. And I don't think the state should be in a position to take it away. So I would say this is a wrong thing to do, banning this. The second is, and I'll just make this point, and I don't think this applies in this particular case, but you can imagine there are a lot of legal and tax consequences of getting married. And even though you might have been sent to jail for the whole of your life, you've got to consider the fact that somebody in that position might still have a family, and they might still have responsibilities towards that family, which we always have allowed prisoners to exercise their responsibilities. And the tax situation, the inheritance tax, and the other things that arise from being married can be affected by that. So it can protect your your partner from having to pay inheritance tax, for example,
Guess
is
what?
one of the reasons people get married. Now, I don't
Guess what?
think
You can
that
think about
applies
that before you
in
wander
this
the
case.
streets, murdering children
You
or whoever else.
can think about that, but you've been sent to jail for the whole of your life. That's your punishment. There aren't other punishments imposed on top of that. That was the punishment given you by the court. So we don't do, additional supernumerary punishments on top of what the court gives you.
Just to be clear, everyone, this new law is part of the Victims
OK, you don't
and
agree with
Prison.
me, Michelle.
I most certainly don't think
Victims and Prisoners
it is
Bill
one
Act,
of the most ridiculous things that I've heard today. And that's
Well, I feel it-
ridiculous.
I
things on a
feel it
daily
very
basis.
strongly.
And that's good. All views are welcome on Dewbs and Co. This is part of the Victims and Prisoners Act. It aims to, I quote, deny the most heinous criminals from enjoying the important life events that they callously took from their victims. Let's just remind ourselves. Levi Belfield, he's murdered multiple people. The highest profile you perhaps be most familiar with was Millie Dowler, the 13-year-old that he kidnapped while she was walking.
And that's the other thing. You always know it's a bad law when it's designed to affect one person.
Paul Embry?
Daniel's just a soft liberal. That's his problem. I think getting married is a right that goes hand in hand with being a free citizen in society. Someone who's not someone who's not incarcerated because they've committed a crime, but someone who's free and is able to enter into that sort of agreement in a free society. I think there are probably some circumstances, such as for compassionate reasons, for example, where it's probably arguable that the law should be relaxed. I don't particularly have a problem with that. And whilst I think that prisoners should have the same protections as any other citizens, I don't think they should have the same freedoms as any other citizen. And I just, if they come out and get married and build a new life for themselves, then all well and good. I'm all in favour of that. As I say, I'm a supporter of the principle of marriage. But it just does not sit comfortably with me, the idea that there can be a wedding ceremony, effectively, in a prison when someone is there to serve a punishment because they've done something seriously wrong. When they come out, they can do it. I'm not convinced it should happen while they're inside.
Anthony says, please can we all remember that prison is actually supposed to be punishment, and if you do indeed end up inside one, you should forego any of the norms afforded to the law-abiding population. Hear, hear, Anthony. It's always fascinating, isn't it, how many people so desperately want this notion of human rights to be respected when it comes to themselves, but then will very happily completely trample all over the human rights of other people in the meantime, like Millie Dowler, for example. What about her human right to be able to go home from school safely? That wasn't respected at all, in the most disgusting way, was it? Your thoughts? After the break, my favourite part of the week, can't lie, Dewberry Tavern opens. Come and join me and let's talk about Huw Edwards. Should he have to repay £200,000 of our money?
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very serious.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%.
Yeah.
If I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about
You'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really create so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. One of my viewers, APJ, just got in touch and said, Michelle, have you ever thought about renaming your show? You could call it the Whiny, Moany Hour. No, I've never thought about that at all. Alongside me, I've got a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the trade unionist and author, Paul Embry. My favourite time of the week. See, this is not moany or whiny or negative. It's positive. Cheers. Happy weekend to each and every single one
Cheers to you.
of
Cheers.
you. Cheers, cheers. Right.
Good health.
If I was to think about what some of you might be talking about in the pub this weekend, I imagine that this fella could perhaps be within your conversations. The former BBC newsreader, Huw Edwards, of course, he pleaded guilty on Wednesday to multiple counts of possessing indecent images of children. Absolutely disgusting. This is him, by the way, arriving at court. One of the things that I found beyond bizarre, if you're being accused of something like that and you're going to prison, why would you meander down the road in this manner? I would be so ashamed of myself.
Did he have any
that
choice?
I would be trying to... Did you see how far he walked along the road?
No.
It wasn't like he just pulled up outside the door in a taxi and deliberately tried to, like, push it. He had quite a reasonable walk.
Well, that was a bit like Gary Glitter when he got done for the same thing, and he was posing on the steps, wasn't he, in front of the paparazzi?
All very weird. Anyway, the BBC boss, Tim Davie, he is now facing questions and will be from the government as well over this £200,000 paycheck. Long story short, the BBC admitted to knowing about his arrest in November, but they continued to pay his full salary until he resigned earlier on this year. Do you reckon he should give this cash back or not, Daniel?
Yeah, I don't understand why people who are suspended in those circumstances carry on getting paid their full pay in the first place.
Because they might be innocent, Daniel.
Yeah, they might be innocent. But
that's the answer.
Yeah, but why are they suspended? I mean, if you know...
But that's a no smoke without fire.
You're going to work on the assumption that somebody is innocent till proven guilty. Legally, that's true. If you're going to apply that in HR circumstances, you wouldn't be suspending them in the first place. You'd say, well, you're innocent till proven guilty, so you carry on working for your money. What I find even more bizarre is that he got a pay rise in the last month. And surely somebody at the BBC should have said, well, you know, he hasn't done a lot for his money for the last 12 months. He spent half of them not actually working. Why are we giving him a pay rise? Or somebody else might have said, even if he deserves a pay rise, maybe this isn't the best moment to give it to him. Nobody did, so they gave him a pay rise as well. Generally, I think the money should come back. I don't know if there's a way of getting it back. But I don't think... I disagree probably with you about the pension. I think his pension, I don't think they can touch, and I don't think they should be able to touch it. He's paid into it all those years.
He's done a terrible thing, obviously, yeah. But being arrested doesn't make you guilty. Being charged doesn't even make you guilty. was a trade union official. I've represented many people in the workplace, including people who were on criminal charges, including people who were suspended from work because they'd been charged. But none of that actually makes you guilty. You're entitled to due process, and you're entitled to the presumption of innocence in the workplace and outside.
Guilty now.
Right, but this is my point. He has pleaded guilty now, and from the point at which he pleads guilty, then his employer or former employer and the rest of society is then entitled to apply the sanctions to him and say, you've now pleaded guilty, so this is what we're going to do. But for the period in which he had been charged but had not yet pleaded guilty, then I just don't think it's right to say to somebody, well, exactly as I said earlier.
What about public conscience?
Well, because
if you know you're guilty and you're taking money from the tax-paying public, where's your head of conscience in all of this?
That's a matter for him and his conscience. But the point that I'm making is the employer, because someone has been arrested or charged with a criminal offence, the employer should not be able to say, we are going to stop your pay now or we're going to sack you, even though nothing has yet been proven against you in a court of law, because in some cases that individual will come to court, will be found to be not guilty, has lost his or her job, lost his or her livelihood because the employer jumped the gun. Now, I've got no sympathy for Huw Edwards. He's obviously ruined and he deserves to be ruined, but we can't make one particular law because of one particular case.
Something for Levi Belfield.
Well, this is the point, something you said previously, Daniel, and you're absolutely right on that. People who are in their workplace have been suspended. They're entitled to the presumption of innocence like everybody else in my
Do you know, another thing that I found quite bizarre about this story, I always find the way that the issue of mental health comes into play. The second that someone suddenly starts getting scrutinised for something and perhaps held accountable for something, this mental health condition that perhaps seemingly wasn't there when they were doing whatever it is that they wanted, miraculously seems to pop up the minute accountability comes into the conversation. I found that quite interesting. Mary says Huw Edwards is a disgrace, but he should not have to pay back the £200,000. Catkins on Twitter, though, says, yes, he absolutely should give the entire thing back and the BBC should hang their heads in shame. My favourite comment of the night says, Kevin, my parents were from the Midlands and they always called crumpets pikelets, sensible people. Good night, everybody. Have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday. Night-night.
A brighter outlook with Box